What practices do you use to identify agreements with evil quickly? This is assuming that this is about your own internal process rather than trying to identify agreements in other people's lives. That's a whole different subject, a lot messier. I'm not talking about that. All right, so for the record, the answers I'm going to give you on all of these questions are Mike's opinion. Everyone say that after me. Ready? Mike's opinion. Thank you. This is Mike's opinion. I'm not trying to represent anybody else when I say this. I'm not teaching theology here. I just want to give you my perspective on this. I've got a few answers to this. One tool that I found to be helpful, just out of necessity and from practice, is I kind of take a step back from the emotion itself, or the thought, or the motivation, or the desire, and pay attention to the pattern of it. If this thing continues to represent itself in multiple ways, in multiple different aspects of my life, in a given moment, then I know this is not just a specific need or desire confined to a certain outcome. It's something else trying to find expression, right? So for example, let's say I want to scroll through Instagram and then Facebook, and then I want to flip through Netflix, and then I want to try and find whatever books I have on my shelf, and then I want to text people, and then I want to play a game on my phone. Let's say that impulse shows up with 6 times in the span of 3 minutes or whatever, right? I'm noticing a pattern here where it's not about a show on Netflix. It's not about a certain thing I wanted to post on my Instagram, or it's not about, a certain game I wanted to play. It was about me looking for some kind of something to distract me, to flood my brain or whatever, right? If I notice that pattern crossing over into other different things, it's not about any specific outcome. It's more about an operation, if you will. I'm okay, this is not about me trying to get something that I want. This is about some need trying to get met, or some problem trying to get buried or masked. And to me, that feels like a pretty quick agreement. Is probably the wrong word, because that would mean that something has already been decided. But it looks like that's a strong place where temptation is participating in my experience, and I'm being sold or offered proposals of solutions to potentially pain that I'm experiencing, or thoughts or feelings I don't want to feel, or avoiding things that I want to have to put my hands to, right? That stuff can come in to be a nice little drug to numb me out, right? Not just me, obviously. This is true for a lot of us. There's so much distraction in our culture today. If I'm noticing that pattern, I'm oh, this is not about any one of those things. It's about something else that has nothing to do with any of that. It's starting underneath me, right? That's one way to recognize that. And that applies to relationships as well. If I notice I'm getting angry with 4 different people throughout the day, it's probably not about necessarily any one of those certain situations or relationships. It might be that I just didn't get enough sleep, or that I'm actually agreeing with something in my life, right? Or if 3 or 4 different things are stressing me out and causing anxiety in my life in a given day, and that's not normal for me, right? When I start seeing these kinds of patterns, so observing patterns, I guess, is one of the tools. Observing patterns. If you're taking notes, write that one down. When I start seeing the thing bleed into other scenarios or circumstances, and it's not unique to any one specific thing, I'm okay, there's actually a broader thing going on here. That often can be the symptom of a spirit actually trying to influence your experience. So anxiety can be a spirit, and it could be influencing the way you perceive or experience anything in your life. It's the weirdest thing. If you say yes to anxiety, it can touch a blessing from the Lord and cause you to be stressed out about it, to hate it, to despise it, right? Which is such a distortion. So observing patterns is one to me it feels like a pretty simple safeguard to pay attention to. If you just can pay attention to patterns and keep track of that stuff, it helps triangulate things and give you a grid for something that might be going on beyond any isolated situation or event. So that's, I think, one that's super helpful for me. Another one is plumb lines. I think I did a teaching on this in my online coaching group for Numa coaching. Yeah, plumb lines is another tool that I use. Actually, there's a part of this that I learned from Jason Valentin, when he was talking about counseling and pastoring people. There's a plumb line that he uses logically, and I'm I was I do the same thing, and we probably talk about it differently, but it's the same principle. When you know what your general state is, or how your emotions tend to sit in your life, you have a general grid for your natural, what's the word I want? Temperament. You have a temperature for what you tend to be in general when you're doing well, or when life is just at peace. That is a plumb line you want to return to and be mindful of, so that if something happens, whether it's an actual event in your life that's hitting emotions, or you step into an atmosphere or pick up somebody else's stuff that has nothing to do with your life and it derails what your normal is, that is another telltale sign that something else is going on. It doesn't mean it's always spiritual, right? Hopefully that's obvious, but sometimes it is. And so having a grid for what your normal is super helpful to navigate when things get different or weird outside of your experience. And that's one of the things that's probably the most confusing about being a feeler, especially initially, is recognizing when what you're experiencing isn't you. It's not about what you've experienced or what's happening to you or what someone said. It's not about any of that stuff. It's about you picking up something that has nothing to do with you that is affecting the way you perceive and experience things in your life, right? And so that's a spirit, that's atmospheres, other people's emotions, that kind of stuff. When you have a moment of clarity and self-awareness and you're at peace with the world, everything's going well, you're content and life is good and the sun is shining. I'm not saying like you believe that stuff. I'm saying you feel it. You're aware of it and like you're in that place. You want to kind of take a mental snapshot, like stick a flag in the ground and be like, okay, this is normal. This is Mike at his best or in his normal state, right? And that shouldn't be an infrequent or an exceptional thing in our lives. It should be something we return to on a regular basis, okay? So you take a snapshot and you get nice and familiar with what that feels like. What are the details surrounding that experience? And then you just continue to acclimate yourself to that state, to that space. Not to force it and not to make it a thing. We're not worshiping that, we're not pursuing it. We're aware of it when it is in effect so that when it gets derailed for whatever reason, we can recognize where the discrepancy is and it helps us have a grid for what's different and why. Okay, super helpful. That one takes work, it takes intentionality, it takes like building a history and recognizing that. But if you do your due diligence, and self-awareness is gonna be a key part of this, you'll have this plumb line to work with for the rest of your life in all the scenarios. And so there are times where I'm in the middle of a conflict in a relationship and I can recognize when there's something going on here that has nothing to do with me because I know what me is, right? Or when I know that there's something going on here that I wouldn't normally bring here, but it's happening anyway and it seems like it's my responsibility, I can then look at like, okay, that's not me normally. That's not the other person. So clearly I'm bringing this to the table. Where is that coming from? And it helps me have a pretty quick grid for where to start looking, right? So I think the plumb line thing is also super helpful. And for the sake of time, I'm going to keep that there. But you guys, observing patterns and plumb lines, super helpful practical tools on how to keep track of your emotional state and recognize agreements you have in your life.